Welcome to A2Council Update, a recap of the Ann Arbor City Council meeting on October 20th, 2025. This meeting included comments and discussion about distributing a comprehensive land use plan for public comment, rezoning and a site plan for development on Ann Arbor Saline Road, amending the marijuana ordinance to remove location restrictions relative to schools, amending the vegetation ordinance to allow taller growth on private property, changing a federal grant agreement for $560,000 to address a council conflict of interest, and changing bylaws for the Planning Commission to organize public comments during meetings. This is the voting chart for the council meeting on October 20th, 2025. There was one absence, Councilmember Jen Iyer from Ward 4. This was her 9th absence since taking office in November 2020. There was one vote of dissent on ordinance changes around vegetation. All other items were approved unanimously. You can find this voting chart and more information about this meeting at A2Council.com. Like and subscribe if you would like to see more content like this. The meeting included a presentation from Jeff Pfeiffer of the Ann Arbor Area Transit Authority.
What we saw this year's budget was an increase in our state operating assistance, or LBO, to a number of $271 million. And that basically sets a standard, keeps us where we were at the previous couple of years. I hope you all had the chance to see some of our new ads. We took a whimsical approach using some humor, at least my attempt at humor, to show folks the money they can save by taking the ride.
There was another presentation from city staff explaining updates to the city website.
And the first step in improving the city's use and stewardship of data was to get our existing resources coherently organized and accessible. And we are doing it through this open data portal. There are tags and topics that you can use to browse the data and resources along with this search window.
After introductory remarks, public comments, and staff explanations, Council discussed agenda items for less than an hour. 27 people signed up in advance to offer public comments. 24 people spoke to topics on the agenda. The consent agenda this week included 4 items and expenditures of about $1.4 million. One item was pulled for discussion. Council considered approving the distribution of an updated comprehensive land use plan. Distributing this plan will lead to a 63-day comment period. Earlier in the evening, residents offered comments about the plan.
It would be naive to commit without an exhaustive vetting and public disclosure of our investor and construction sponsors.
As a near-campus neighborhood, we are wondering why the comprehensive plan still does not address university-related land use. Also, why is there no assessment of short-term rentals in the plan? What about co-ops? Many of my neighbors, including myself, support co-ops because they offer affordable housing for students and non-students alike. You are causing the speculation with this gentrification plan.
I appreciate the hard work of Planning Commission and planning staff in producing a plan that so thoughtfully promotes the city's values of equity, sustainability, affordability, and flexibility.
Let's move it into that mandated review period and allow us to continue moving forward into a more just, a more inclusive, a more accessible, and a more equitable Ann Arbor that I think we can all love even more.
I come to you as a 30-plus year real estate professional who's been providing affordable and workforce housing for 30 years in gentle density. What this plan will do is the exact opposite of what we want it to do. This plan makes vulnerable the more affordable, more moderate-priced housing segments while not adding to those segments.
Every day we delay, another person with new ideas and different perspectives loses the chance to call Ann Arbor their home.
Identify the consequences, both positive and negative, and use that to inform further decisions on rezoning. Follow the money to determine who is benefiting from the development and whether those profits are staying in our city.
This is our chance to say yes to a city that reflects the values of equity, affordability, sustainability, and accessibility for all.
These are the most affordable homes in the entire city. And so if you take a look at what it would look like if we had a transition zone, well, let's look at 2 scenarios. If you live next to a ridged home like this, where the sun just simply makes a curve, and for a moment it's at the peak, here it is flat all the way across.
I would not characterize the plan as having the broad community support called for in the July Council Resolution Directive to City Planning. We are weary of unchecked market dynamics that will accelerate economic disparity and drive up the cost of land, and we are mistrusting of the care and consideration of developers with no ties to our community beyond profit. This plan is not the Ann Arbor I know and love, and it has not been shaped in a spirit of collaboration befitting of our community.
You've created a bold plan for greed and wrapped it in a marketing material in an effort to make it acceptable. But the results of the plan will not support the values you claim to uphold.
Support others who want to share in more of how great it is to live in Ann Arbor. It's time to make Ann Arbor more welcoming to more people.
I desire city development in a manner that creates opportunity for people who work here and want to create a life here. When I look at the latest public zoning map, however, I see the details left specifically vague and opportunities for developers and investors to maximize profits, like we have seen in our downtown, rather than maximizing utilization of the land and culture we have to offer.
This is the step that transformed years of extensive community input into the transparent, participatory, and forward-looking public deliberation the legislature envisioned.
This is a petition to suspend the planning process and to restart it with genuine involvement from residents across all neighborhoods of the city. This process has consistently lacked transparency, inclusivity, and democratic fairness.
You could have notified all the property owners, and you chose not to. You could have held dialogues with neighborhoods, but you chose not to. People have been misled to believe that the plan will lower costs of home prices and rent for them. It won't. You have failed your responsibility to create an authentic and robust engagement process.
Council discussed it for about 15 minutes.
I view tonight's vote as an important step in our larger city effort to combat an affordability crisis and housing shortage.
It's consolidation of past work and also new ideas about where we want to head for the next 25, 30 years. I hope that everybody will stay engaged and continue to, as we move forward with this.
Throughout this process, Council and the Planning Commission engaged and listened to thousands of members of the public with a wide range of views on housing in our community.
Some folks ask, where's the affordable housing? Where's the city-built housing? The draft envisions market housing. That is its goal.
It was approved unanimously. After a brief introduction, Council unanimously approved the rezoning of a parking lot owned by Argus Farm Stop so that the business can continue to use it for storage. After a brief introduction, Council unanimously approved an amendment that adds language to the bylaws of the Transportation Commission. Council then considered the rezoning of property at Ann Arbor Saline Road, just behind the Whole Foods. This property is currently zoned office. Rezoning for multifamily residential will allow a new 5-story complex with 262 apartments. At a public hearing, residents spoke about the project.
It's much needed housing in a housing crisis, and this is a great location for this level of density.
Your ability to change the rules in favor of the builders, blur the lines of zoning codes, and change what is considered a conflict of interest while still promoting pro-affordability, pro-multifamily housing is a masterclass of resident deception.
They can build a 3-story apartment there now, and I wouldn't be here today, I'd be watching the Lions.
He's right. I wouldn't be here either if it was going to be a 3 or even a 4-story building. I am concerned that this apartment building will further exacerbate the existing traffic conditions on Oak Brook Drive and Ann Arbor Saline Road. We have a lot of walkers, especially with the elderly.
And I beg you to limit the size of this building and limit the amount of traffic that you're unleashing.
I think this is a net benefit for the city, this particular project. I would have a much higher comfort level if the sustainability elements were written into the development agreement.
If I wasn't forced to own a single-family home, I would consider living there. I'm really glad that you're considering changing the zoning.
With help from staff, Council discussed the rezoning for about 10 minutes.
The density proposed is nearly, but not quite, 3 times the density currently allowed. So, in other words, the project nearly triples the allowable residential density for the site.
Staff has determined that a crosswalk is needed at the existing site drive
entrance that meets safety concerns for pedestrians in the corridor. They reviewed for a traffic signal and do not find that it's warranted. The safer, more effective approach here is to slow vehicles down and not through a traffic light.
And it is important that we as a community, utilize our land for our long-term benefits.
City staff explained that neighbors at Oak Brook condominiums had submitted a petition in opposition to the rezoning at Ann Arbor Saline Road. When property owners within 100 feet of a rezoning submit a petition of protest, state law dictates that more votes are required for council to approve it.
We did receive action from the Condo Board Association. My conclusion of that is that this would require the 8-vote minimum to 8 affirmative votes to affect that rezoning because we received the correspondence from the condominium board.
This higher vote requirement was unlikely to make a difference. Since the election of a unanimous council, every developer request for a rezoning has been approved unanimously by however many council members were in attendance. One rezoning was approved with just 8 votes, only because 3 council members were absent. The rezoning at Ann Arbor Saline Road was approved unanimously. Council then considered the site plan for development on the property it had just rezoned.
We don't have a commitment to sustainability, or to all the sustainability elements that were mentioned within the context of the Planning Commission to conversations. I hope that all attempts will be made by the development team on this to deliver on those elements.
The site plan was approved unanimously. Without discussion, Council unanimously approved at first reading the rezoning of a township island that was recently annexed into the city. At a future meeting, this rezoning will be the subject of a public hearing and final approval at second reading. After a brief introduction, Council unanimously approved at first reading the rezoning of township property that was previously annexed as part of a development on Pontiac Trail. At a future meeting, this rezoning will be the subject of a public hearing and final approval at second reading. Council then considered an ordinance amendment that will remove a location restriction on marijuana businesses. That restriction currently prohibits marijuana businesses from locating within 1,000 feet of a K-12 school. Marijuana dispensaries have been doing business within 1,000 feet of 2 preschools, one on Ashley and one on Plaza Drive. The state of Michigan now considers these programs equivalent to kindergarten, and those businesses a violation of the local ordinance. With help from staff, Council discussed the change for about 20 minutes.
The proposed ordinance removes what is currently a mandatory citywide buffer of 1,000 feet between marijuana businesses and schools. It does not mean that marijuana businesses will operate right next door to schools because each and every one will be removed by City Planning Commission for compatibility with context.
An amendment was proposed.
What it comes down to is essentially would create a 100-foot buffer for marijuana related establishments from a K-12 school, and that would ensure that they are not adjacent to a school.
The amendment, adding a location restriction of 100 feet, was approved unanimously. Discussion continued on the topic of potentially removing a cap on the number of businesses allowed to operate in the city. A staff memo explained that this cap was designed to prevent oversaturation and displacement of other businesses. That memo also explained that the amendments related to schools did not impact the separation requirement for businesses. One council member did not realize that businesses cannot locate within 600 feet of each other.
When I think about concentration and distribution, I'm wondering if we could also get a map showing that kind of concentration and distribution currently. I mean, it's probably easy.
Where the facilities are located?
Yeah, where the facilities are.
We have always maintained that map actually on our website because we have locational restrictions from how close a business can be to another business.
Interesting.
The ordinance amendment was approved as amended with a 100-foot location restriction relative to K-12 schools. At a future meeting, it will be the subject of a public hearing and final approval at second reading. Council considered an ordinance amendment regulating the height of vegetation permitted on private property adjacent to sidewalks and roadways. Changes will permit plantings so long as they allow an 8-foot clearance over sidewalks and a 14-foot clearance over streets.
So the current ordinance limits vegetation, the one that is in law today, limits vegetation outside of a planned garden bed to 12 inches in heights. Property owners will still need to make sure that vegetation doesn't block sidewalks or streets, obscure sight lines, or create hazards for people walking, biking, or driving. But beyond that, people can plant what's good for pollinators, for stormwater, and for the environment as a whole.
One council member raised concerns.
We've had properties in my ward that either have kind of an abandoned or absentee landlord, a vacant property with an out-of-town person who's not maintaining their property, and really has created kind of a nuisance for nearby neighbors.
The ordinance amendment was approved at first reading, with only Councilmember Redina voting in opposition. At a future meeting, it will be the subject of a public hearing and final approval at second reading. Council then considered a resolution to rescind an agreement approved at the previous meeting in order to change the recipient of $560,000 in federal grant funds. On October 6, 2025, City Council approved an agreement directing federal funds to UA190 IBEW 252 LLC. IBEW 252 is a client of Councilmember Jen Ayer's personal business, Ayer Consulting. IBEW unions have paid Ayer Consulting over $127,000 since she was elected to Ann Arbor City Council. The IBEW 252, named in the grant agreement, has paid Ayer Consulting over $65,000. When IBEW 252 appeared on the October 6th agenda as a recipient of $560,000 in federal funds, Ayer did not admit any conflict of interest or recuse herself from the vote. When the conflict was identified, Ayer initially claimed that the LLC on the grant agreement was a wholly separate legal entity from the IBEW 252 that pays her consulting fees. She claimed that the city attorney had confirmed this. Neither Ayer nor the city attorney have addressed the fact that the IBEW 252 lists that LLC partnership as an asset. The entity that has paid Councilmember Ayer over $65,000 also owns 50% of the LLC that Ayer voted to approve as a grantee for $560,000 in federal funds. At this week's meeting, the original agreement was rescinded in order to remove any reference to IBEW 252. City Administrator Milton Dohoney offered the only comment.
We inadvertently listed the wrong subrecipient initially. It's the administration's error. We extend our apologies for making it, but time to time we are going to be in error, but we acknowledge it.
A new agreement was approved unanimously without Councilmember Ayer's vote because she was absent. For more information about this issue, follow the link in the description of this video. Finally, Council considered amendments to the Planning Commission bylaws, which will designate specific comment periods on topics that do not have dedicated public hearings.
These dedicated public comment periods reduces that procedural friction and enables things to move through the system faster, thus making staff's lives easier, petition lives easier, commissioners' lives easier.
The new bylaws were approved unanimously. Discussion of the agenda ended before 10 p.m. There were additional public comments.
Each of the plan's detractors takes their own issue with the plan. I am unconvinced that a completely new plan or yet another draft would not be plagued with the same issues.
We were missing in this process here the standard issue data and modeling of infrastructure and public costs, the development of illustrative scenarios of different quantities and locations of density. That kind of analysis is not expensive or unusual in this sort of a plan, and I don't know why it was omitted here.
Our City Planning Commission and planning staff have poured their hearts and their minds into this effort.
I'm glad to have found a group of friends and neighbors for more neighbors.
Since you've already voted, and I thank you for your votes, my comment about the comprehensive plan is no longer relevant.
The majority of Ann Arbor wants density, and we'll get behind you based on the platforms that you ran on in the first place.
Finally, Council went into closed session for over an hour to discuss the purchase or lease of property, as well as 2 legal memos received on October 15th and October 16th. The meeting adjourned before 11:30 p.m. For more information about this meeting, visit A2Council.com.
Welcome to this week's A2Council Moment of Zen.
Once council releases the plan for public comment, you will be able to submit comments through a form.
Councilmember?
Yes?
Perhaps during the...
Oh, must I? This is more like a public service announcement than a...
Perhaps we could ask staff as to how the perhaps we could ask staff how the engagement will be done.
Okay. But I don't want to give up my time for that. I have other things to say.
Understood.